Hi there, welcome back to the Art of Business English. Andrew Ambrosius here again for another episode. And in today's episode, we're going to be looking at some language and techniques to help you clarify your ideas. Okay, so specifically, we'll be looking at language for sequencing and giving examples. So if you've ever struggled putting your ideas into a logical order, then this lesson will definitely be for you. We're going to teach you some simple techniques that will have you speaking clearly in no time. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to do the following. Use expressions to gain time to allow you to think about what you're going to say. Use sequencing language to structure your sentences. And give you examples to clarify your ideas, okay? So in the final part of the episode, what I will do is I'll give you a model example of how you can put these skills into a coherent paragraph, okay? So let's get started then. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with buying time. So have you ever found yourself in a meeting or a conference call where you don't really have time to think about what to say? Do you feel embarrassed when your ideas come out all wrong and mixed up? Personally, I know how you feel, okay? I've been there. It takes time to get your thoughts in another language into order. So don't worry, because in the first part of this lesson, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some expressions so that you can buy some time, okay? And buying time basically means saying something to fill a dead silence, okay? And so instead of just being completely silent, we have some pre-prepared expressions that we can use just to give ourselves 3, 4, 5 seconds to have a think, okay? So let's have a look then at some expressions for buying time. So the first one, that's a good question. Example, that's a good question. I need a second to answer that. Well, I think. Okay, the next one. That's an interesting question. So an example would be, that's an interesting question. I would say, and then off you go. Another one, once you've already started. Okay, in other words, the project is over budget. Okay, so basically we can say in other words if we want to really clarify what we said before. Maybe it was confusing. So again, another one, let me think about that. So let me think about that. Oh yes, well, I agree, Next one, I think it's also worth mentioning. So I think it is also worth mentioning. I think it is also worth mentioning that we didn't initially accept this proposal. Okay, so let's go. Another one, let me put that in different words. So let me put that in different words. When I said I was trying to say tal, okay, that's a good expression if you get confused and then you realize that what you're saying is wrong. So what you do is you say, let me put that in different words, and you start again, okay? So another one, let's see, that's not an easy question to answer. So let's see, that's not an easy question to answer. However, I would say that, okay, so these are some expressions that we can use to buy some time, okay? Another one, and the final one, I'm glad you asked me that question. Okay, it's always nice. Even if you're not glad, you can say, I'm glad you asked me that question. If it was up to me, I would accept the current proposal. Okay, so even if we're not happy, we can say, I'm glad you asked me that question. Okay, again, all of these expressions are to buy time and just give us a little bit of time to have a think about what we're going to say. Okay. So let's move on then to the next part of this lesson, which is sequencing language. So if you aren't already aware, basically sequencing language is a super simple way for you to gain more confidence, okay, when you're speaking, and to help you structure your ideas into a logical flow. So using a combination of time-buying expressions and sequencing language, we can actually give ourselves enough time to think and put what we want to say into an easy to follow order. Okay, so secondly, we can also use sequencing to signal to other participants in a meeting or conference call that we have a number of points, okay, to contribute to the conversation. So this basically helps prevent people from interrupting us. Okay, another thing is a simple example, okay, of how this works in practice is basically the following. Okay, so give you an example now. I would like to say two things in response to the question. So here, what you're doing is you're making it very clear that you'll be adding 2 points. Firstly, there's your first sequencing word. Firstly, I believe this client has some financial problems. And secondly, if this is true, I believe we should consider our options before supplying any further products. Okay, so here what you've done is you have introduced that you're going to say 2 points, okay? You've used firstly for the first point, okay? And then you've given your opinion with I believe instead of using I think. And then you've put secondly, and then again you've given your opinion. So it's very clear and concise about what you believe, all right? So as you can see, we have said at the beginning that we'll be adding 2 ideas, and then we've used the sequencing language to order each of these and prevent interruptions. That's important, okay? And this can be very useful on a conference call, okay? Because, people, they can't actually see you. So when you are on a conference call, you're missing a lot of the body language cues, okay? So if you're using this technique in a meeting or in an in-person meeting, then what you can actually do is if you say, I've got 2 things I'd like to say, you can actually hold up 2 fingers, and this will clearly demonstrate, okay, that you have got 2 things that you want to say. And generally, people will not interrupt you if you say you've got 2 things and then you use your sequencing language to introduce those 2 points. So let's take a look at some sequencing language. Okay, so to begin with, you can say, in the first place, first of all. So in the first place, I believe that I told you that the funding will come through next week. In the second place, secondly, next, then, and after that, or afterwards. So secondly, as you are aware, we cannot take this forward until the funding is received. Now, I'm going to just quickly explain something which is important, okay, because it's a very common mistake. Remember that you must use after that, okay, so the expression after that, which must be followed by a subject, verb, or object, whereas after is only followed by an object. So you can't really use after, después, okay, as a sequencing word, okay? You can say after the party, because the party is an object, después de la fiesta. So después is after that or afterwards. However, después de would be after plus an object, okay? So we can only use after that and afterwards followed by a subject, verb, or object, all right? So it's a very common mistake. It won't really affect understanding, but it does affect your fluency, okay? So let's look then in the third place. So in the third place, next, then, after that, or afterwards, okay? We could also say thirdly, okay? So next, I would like to cover sales projections for the coming month. And to wrap things up, we could say with your last point, finally, in the end, lastly, last of all. So lastly, I'll be looking at future developments in the sector. Now, be careful with in the end, okay? In the end is followed by a subject, a verb, and an object, whereas at the end is followed by an object. So al final is at the end of. So al final de la calle, at the end of the street, okay? You can't say in the end. Okay, al final, in the end. You can say al final, in the end, followed by a subject, verb, object. So in the end, everyone enjoyed the party. Okay, so it's everyone, subject, enjoyed, verb, the party, object. Okay, so don't confuse in the end with at the end. That is also a very common mistake. And then we can say in conclusion or to sum up. So in conclusion, I will just wrap things up by saying, okay, again, this is great vocabulary for using in presentations as well, okay? So let's move on and look at giving some examples. Now that we've ordered our thoughts and can put our ideas into a logical flow, it's time to help demonstrate what we're trying to say, okay? And that is by giving examples. So giving examples is the fastest way to make what you are saying seem more credible, okay? And it helps to provide evidence to support your arguments. It is no secret that when writing a thesis at university, you must provide evidence to support your arguments and back up your claims. And the same is true in business, okay? We need to show to others that what we are saying is true. And the best way to do that is to elaborate with an example, okay? So let's take a look at some simple expressions for providing examples. So the first one and the most common is for example. So, for example, 2 years ago, the same issue arose on another project. Okay. Next one. For instance, we could offer a rebate to entice the client. Next one. If I can use an example, just the other day, I came across the same problem. And then you elaborate with your example. I'd like to illustrate my point by adding. So I'd like to illustrate my point by adding. I'd like to illustrate my point by adding that with a 10% reduction in capital expenditure, we could break even. And such as is followed by a list. Now, a list can be a list of one thing or a list of many things. For example, we could contact our top 3 clients, such as Volvo, BMW, and Ford. Okay, so you're listing off the 3 clients to give an example. Okay, right. That basically brings us then to the last part of this episode. Now, just to add quickly, this information will appear on our website. So if you do want to come and take a look and grab some of these expressions, then do head over to the Art of Business English website. Now, let's look at a model answer. I'm going to give you 2 examples, okay? So in the first part, there is a question, okay? And then there is the answer. So, number 1, John, can you please explain why sales are down 10% this quarter? Oh, I'm glad you asked me that question. Let me just think about that for a second. Well, there are 2 main reasons for the current drop in sales. Firstly, unseasonably warm weather for this time of year. For instance, this has meant less people are buying our heaters. Secondly, due to this drop in demand, our competitors have undertaken aggressive discounting on their heaters. As you can imagine, this has had a negative effect on our sales. Okay, so even though John isn't very happy about being asked why sales have dropped in the quarter, he says, I'm glad you asked me that question. And then we use the next one to buy some time. Let me just think for a second. Okay, it's perfectly acceptable. And then we go on with the sequencing language. So firstly, unseasonably warm weather. For instance, he gives an example. This means that less people are buying heaters. And secondly, there is a drop in demand. So the competitors have undertaken aggressive discounting. Okay, so that's basically the first example of how we can use sequencing and examples in practice. Let's take a look at the second one. So I still don't see why we should start working with your company. I think it's worth mentioning that there are 3 main reasons why you should work with us. In the first place, we have the best distribution network of all companies in Spain. For example, we move more than 1 million products a day. In the second place, we can offer competitive pricing and scalability for your business. And finally, we have the best customer support team of any company in the sector. Okay, so 3 very solid reasons why this company should work with the new company. So you can see he's used, I think it's worth mentioning, okay, to buy some time, and then stated that there are 3 main reasons, so it's very clear. And then in the first place, and then for example is given, so they move 1 million products a day. In the second place, competitive pricing, and finally, just to finalize the third point, we have the best customer support team. So you can see here that those 2 paragraphs are very clear because of the way we have structured each of the ideas, and we've used some buying time techniques at the beginning, and we've also provided 1 example to help illustrate our argument or demonstrate our point. Okay, so let's just wrap things up then. Before I go, I'd just like to finish by saying that sequencing and giving examples are very powerful communicative tools, and they really can help you improve your communication skills in English. And the best way to practice these skills is by planning to use them in 2 ways, okay? So you can start by incorporating them into your emails, okay? It's much easier to use sequencing language in the written form. You have time to think about it. So I really encourage you to start incorporating these at the beginning of paragraphs, okay? Here you'll also have the time to think, and it'll be easier to implement the sequencing. And secondly, and this is key, I think, you need to plan your conference call and meeting, okay? I think many people are going into conference calls and meetings in English, and they're not really thinking or planning about what type of questions they might get asked. And if you know you're going into a meeting, I don't know, a sales meeting or a meeting where you're going to be asked specific questions because they're very common, then you can prepare the technical information and then think about how you can present the information in a sequential order. So by planning the meeting a little bit in advance and thinking about the types of questions you're going to get asked, then we can really practice using this buying time language and sequencing language. And finally, you can also try practicing with your colleagues, okay, some phrases for buying time. So make a conscious effort to use at least 2 of them during your next encounter in English, okay? So that's my advice for you guys. And that's all we have time for today. So as always, we hope you have found this episode interesting. Please feel free to share this episode with your friends and family or any of your colleagues who speak English. And if you do have any questions, then do not hesitate, as always, to contact us or leave us a comment over at The Art of Business English. And we look forward to having you next week. And till then, take care. Bye for now.